Good morning. This is Kara and welcome to Amico. And today I'm going to be glazing with one of our new glazes, well, new last year. This is a combination of Chai Matte from our Shino series and Satin Oribe, which came out in 2019. I realize we might be a little early, so I'm going to be waiting for people to join us a little bit. So I'm going to prepare my bisqueware for glazing. So I just take a damp sponge, sponge it off. You do not need to rinse ware, and if you actually run it underneath a faucet, you may need to wait a little bit before you can glaze. So I just use a damp sponge and it's ready to go. So to replicate this vase, Chai Matte Shino and Satin Oribe, I started with Chai Matte Shino and the Shino series is kind of okay, there we go. The Shino series did not want to be opened today. So the Shino series are glazes that replicate the look of traditional Asian Shino glazes. They're great on texture. They're kind of rustic looking. They are very high in iron, and so even if you're using them on a white clay like I am, this is 11M, which is Amico's A-Mix clay. It's a white stoneware. So even if you're using them on a white clay, they will come out with a very red, like an iron clay finish. But I'm going to bring 2 coats all the way to the foot. And yes, they are kind of on the runny side. That is pretty typical. I'm just going to come up to just over the shoulder. And I'm not worried about making it a very even coating, because these glazes kind of look more interesting, kind of more of that rustic look, when they're not even. So I just want to, but I want to make sure that it's a nice, generous coat. So, as I said, they're kind of rustic looking. They really do best if you get 3 solid coats on. So if you're using them and you find that they're always coming out brown instead of, like, say you're using an oolong or acai, and they're just coming out brown without the so I am doing the second coat at this point. I realize it's most of the time I have to wait a while for a first coat to dry, but the Shinos dry pretty quickly. So anyway, if you're finding that your color is not showing up, the main color, like for oolong it would be green, for acai it would be like a dark gray blue. If that main color isn't showing up, you need to go a bit thicker. And that can be tough because these are very, very thin glazes when they come out of the jar. If you're worried about getting it too thick, or if you have a texture that's really subtle and you're worried about it not showing up with too thick an application, what you can do is apply 1 or 2 coats and then sponge it back, and then apply 1 or 2 more coats on top of that, so that you have the glaze sinks into the texture of the piece, and you get a thicker area in that textured area, in those textured parts. So something like this, for example, you can apply it and let it dry, and then sponge it back, so you still have a lot in the crevices. And then apply another coat on top of that. That would be one way to make sure you get a thicker application. See, it doesn't really want to go into that deep texture. But that would be one way to get it to show some deeper texture if you have very, very shallow texture. Let's set that aside. That's just a little sample thing. So I've got 2 coats on there. This glaze dries really fast. So I've got 2 coats on there. You can see how it is kind of dripping a little bit where the texture lets it run down the pot. And I'm going to put a 3rd coat just around that textured band. The foot will be kind of a darker brown, and then this will have a creamier look to it. Now, another thing about the Shino matte glazes is that they're going to be a little bit more satin at cone 6 and a little bit drier at cone 5. If you're finding that you are using one of the matte Shino series and it's like rough, it's so matte that it's like sandpaper texture, you may need to calibrate your kiln. Your kiln might not be making it to a full cone 5, or just fire to cone 6 and see if you like that better. They do have a lot of variation depending on the firing. So if you're firing a little hotter, they will come out a little bit more satin. Set that brush aside. So they'll look the same on all clay bodies, regardless as to whether your clay body is red or white. It will give it the appearance of a red clay. You can see how it comes out, that really darker color. They're also pretty stable, so I can take that glaze all the way to the foot, and as long as I'm not letting it run onto the foot, it will stay right where I need it to be. Which I really like about a glaze. I know that a lot of people worry about their kiln shelves. So the Shinos, whether they're matte or glossy, they don't move very much. Like the Celadons, they'll stay put. So this is a combination that I just recently had tried out and I thought was quite nice. And some other glazes that I really love with the Shino series are the frosted glazes, the PC frosted glazes. Like we have frosted turquoise and frosted melon. Both have a really rustic, kind of almost crackled kind of look, even though they're silky satin glazes. And over the Shinos, they really do look very, very rustic. I also really like the lustrous jade with any of the Shinos. Textured amber, not textured amber brown, but textured amber is also kind of a matte glaze, and it almost gets a sparkle in some instances. Tourmaline and Art Deco green are also some PC glazes that look really nice with the Shinos. So glazes that kind of are more rustic are great combinations. And of course, here we have the Satin Oribe. So this is already dry to the touch. So I'm going to go ahead and put coat number 1 of Satin Oribe. Sorry, that was really quick. Here we go. Satin Oribe, PC-15. So I'm going to handle this by the outside And first I'm going to glaze the inside. So I feel like our Shino series sometimes gets forgotten with all the PC layering, and they're really beautiful glazes, especially if you're looking for something that is a more natural appearance and a little bit more subtle. I got a spot of glaze there, but I'm just going to leave it. I'm going to bring the Satin Oribe right down to the shoulder. As I've said before, you'll notice that I reload my brush often so that I'm kind of floating that glaze on rather than brushing until the glaze is dry. Sorry, I'm looking inside to make sure I got all of those angles. You can, if you're getting really tired of brushing the insides, or if you have a piece that has a very narrow neck and you can't really get in there, you can pour glaze, but some of the brushing glazes are a little too thick for pouring, and so you would have to add a little water. And if you're doing something like that, I would recommend getting another container and adding a little water. So put a little bit of glaze in a small container, add a little bit of water, and then just to get it just thin enough to go inside, pour it in, and then swirl it around, and you can pour it back out. And if you have any left over, it's up to you as to whether you want to put it back into your glaze jar or not, but you're not adding water to the entire jar of glaze and making it so that it can't be brushed in the future because it might be too thin. So we are done with part 1, and I will be back at 12:30 and we'll do part 2. I'll put 2 and 3 coats on this for the next part. And if you have any questions for me for part 2, please comment here and I will answer your questions when we come back. I look forward to seeing you then. Bye.